welcome. We're going to call this Washington Square, your neighborhood, your library. Like we said, there are a couple of residents here, which are longtime folks, so that's terrific. There's a really, really rich history in this particular area of all kinds. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, kind of where all of that started and where the neighborhood itself came from. And then we'll get to, hence the library. That's where that came from. So that's sort of our course of action. Take a little bit of a look back at Washington Square. Before it was ever Washington Square, what was here, namely National Driving Park and State Fairgrounds was right around the corner here. Lots of different industry was here in this area. And then it became a neighborhood. So we'll kind of talk about where that came from and where the business district and all of that, how that sort of developed. And then eventually where the library came from and how that developed and how that came about. So that's kind of where we're growing, where we're growing. This is from the 1860s. I put this in here at the beginning just to kind of illustrate this little dark area down here and on this side is actually the downtown business district. So even in the 1860s, that's basically downtown. Portage Street was all of 3 blocks long. So we see Portage Street end here at Lovell. And that was called the lower end of Portage Street. Beyond that, before it became Portage Road, it went by a bunch of different names. I was doing some searching for, working on another project, and I ran onto a deed that described it as the road to Austin Lake. So I thought that was rather interesting. But just to kind of give you an idea that, we think, well, we're so close here, kind of connected with the city and whatnot. This library is way out in the sticks. We weren't anywhere near the downtown area. So just to kind of give you a little bit of perspective there, this was a fairly remote location to begin with. So that, of course, changed over the years, but nonetheless, we're looking here at a map from 1859. And this is really one of the first maps that begins to show this area in earnest connected with the downtown. And noteworthy here at the very top in the center is a mill. And that was one of the first things that came about out here. It was run by David Walbridge, and there's a historical marker about it. But a grist mill, milled flour and such. So it was actually the second mill in the greater Kalamazoo area, and only about the 3rd or 4th in the county. So that came about in the 1830s. Later 1830s. You can see it there in the circle. It's circled on what was then called Walbridge Street. That later changed to Jackson Street now, but it's in the same spot. And Walbridge called his the Portage Mill. It was on an arm of Portage Creek, which had been extended up through this area and eventually flooded into a couple of large mill ponds. So that was originally a mill race that went up here. It was long ago blocked off and built over now, so there's no evidence of it whatsoever. But Walbridge ran his mill for a couple of decades, and then eventually it was taken over by David Merrill and William McCordy. Merrill and McCordy were well-known millers around this area, and they set it up as what they called the Cold Stream Mill. same spot, same mill, but it ran until, at least until the turn of the next century. I'm not sure exactly when it closed up and went away, but nonetheless, it was there. And by then, of course, it was called Jackson Street. This is where the location would be today. So if we were to pull up a Google map, the mill sits right about in the section of, or in the middle of Howard's warehouse there. So, but that's where it was. All right, so if we're back still on 1859, if we scroll down a little bit, this gets interesting. This is the National Fairgrounds. Quite literally right across the street here was very large state fairgrounds. They had horse races there. It was set up as a horse racing facility. And fairgrounds, they had the state fair was there several years. They had baseball field out there. They played baseball. And I mean, we're talking early stuff, 1860s, 1870s. So it was a really big operation. This is really the only photograph that at least that we know of. But we can see, you can see the tents and things in the background. And of course, everybody is dressed to the nines to go out to the fairgrounds, go out to the fair. So that was in the 1880s. Lots of things going on as far as the fair goes. Like I said, a lot of even statewide events, and the horse races were huge. That went on for quite a while. Now we're into the 1870s. We can still see the fairgrounds there. And of course the mill is still there. This 1874 map I think is interesting. If we zoom in a little bit, it's as if, and of course I don't have any documentation to this, but other than anecdotal evidence, but if you look at it, it's almost like they're trying to create a resort area out of this. So we've got the fairgrounds right down here, but over along here we've got the Portage House Hotel. We've got the Park House Hotel. We've got Mineral Springs Bath House over here. So they're really trying to turn it into an area that would attract people, or if you come out, and in those days, this is before the streetcars now. So in those days, it would have been a journey to get out here, so why not offer a place to stay? And so it clearly developed around that. So by that time, of course, the brewery was up here. So there was lots going on, and I think it's real interesting that there would be several hotels that would pop up around there. We go up to, we're at 1890 now. Driving Park is still there, but interestingly now you can start to see more of these plats have filled in. Certainly not all of the lots. In fact, a very small number of the lots actually have buildings on them. So even if they have sold by speculators or sold to speculators or whatever, there isn't that much population density at that point in time, but certainly you can start to see how these plats have started to build in, and then build in still around the driving park. So that of course was eventually moved, but that's where it would land today. So if we looked at a Google map right now, it would be between, what is this? It would be between Stockbridge and Clinton. So kind of in that general area. So if you were to visit someone, or if you had a house in that area, your house used to sit on a horse track. So this neighborhood begins to develop. And a lot of it developed because of this guy. This is Charles Hayes. he had a lot of things going on, but interestingly, he was born and raised and educated in Kalamazoo. He was born in 1862. He attended Kalamazoo High School. He attended K College, and was really a kind of a mover and shaker, as it were, as far as development goes. And much of what we know about this neighborhood, or recognize as this neighborhood, was developed because of him. So we see South Side Improvement Edition, Hayes Park, South Park, Elmwood Park. All of those are properties that he laid out. So again, we're back in 1910 here. We can really see how things have begun to develop. Of course, this is Portage Street that goes down through the middle here. But here's the South Side Improvement Company. He was responsible for that. Directly across the street is Hayes Park. So that was his addition. Directly south of that was the South Park addition. And then farther south of that, off of this map, is the Elmwood plat. So these were all areas that he bought up, platted out, and then sold the lots. And then the idea being you could build on them or whatever. I love this picture. This is them working on that very plat. And such an interesting kind of view, because we've got lines of dump trucks going up and down the street here, which you would expect. But I wouldn't have expected horse-drawn machinery at this stage in the game. But nonetheless, there it is. And I just think that's an amazing photo. It just kind of captures that right on the cusp of, mechanization and whatever. So.
What year do you think that photo was?
Oh, we're probably talking about 1910 or so, shortly after the turn of the century. I'm not an expert on when and how that was developed, and when each of those plats was. I could certainly look it up. I work at the library, so. But yeah. So these are home sites. They were set up. This is in Elmwood plat. Empty lots that you could buy. This one I think is interesting. This is the handwriting down here this says Central Park plat. I'm not sure exactly where that is. It says it's on Olmsted Road, which Lake Street used to be called Olmsted Road. So it says it there, but in very fine writing down at the bottom there, it's like corrected. It says it's Miller Road. So I'm not sure. I'd have to look up. Yeah.
When did the north-south railroad tracks come in?
That's another good question. East-west came in 1846. Probably, I'm going to say 1850s, late 1850s, maybe 1860s. I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure. So what brought all of this stuff? Why all of a sudden this growth, this explosive growth in homes and urban development? Where are all these people coming from? Well, quite frankly, jobs. There was plenty to do around this area. Celery was a really big deal. Kalamazoo celery was known throughout the country. In fact, we used to ship rail car loads full of celery out every day. If you can imagine, you go to grocery store now and there's a little bin with a few things of celery, and you grab one or whatever, but just imagine railroad cars loaded with celery that would ship it all over the country. It was in this lowland area, so we're west of Portage Road, kind of to the west here, where it kind of dips down into the valley there. So we've got Lake Street down here, we've got Vine Street, and this sort of low area along the creek. Really rich, deep, rich black soil that lent itself very well to growing that. So there was a Dutchman that came and pretty much discovered that this would be really fertile ground. So this whole industry developed. And as I pointed out, it was a very, very labor-intensive industry. I mean, all of these things, there were bleacher boards had to be set up, and all of this stuff had to be groomed and weeded and cared for, and then, of course, picking and cleaning up and replanting and all of that. So this was not a bunch of kind of local farmers. This was a big industry that employed a lot of people. So we've got the celery industry. We've also got paper is starting to come in. Now we're right at the turn of the century. So 1901, we've got the King Paper Company. That is up at the top corner there, right on the north side of Lake Street. And of course, they employed hundreds. So they're up there. We've also got the Michigan Buggy Company, which eventually became the Michigan Motor Car Company when the automobile kind of began to replace horse travel. Did you guys know that we had quite a few, we had several automobile manufacturing plants here in town? I mean, everybody probably knows about Checker, but there were several others. They didn't last a long time, but this was one of the bigger ones. So the Michigan Motor Car Company, very prestigious automobile to own in Michigan. So that was a big concern. That was down there at the end off of, I think that's Race Street, if I remember right. Reed Street, sorry. So at the end of Reed Street. We've also have the Superior Paper Company. This sprung up in 1901. This is down here on the south side of Alcott. And again, employed hundreds. Even bigger was the Bryant Paper Mills. This was a huge concern, and that, of course, was just on the north side of Alcott. Don't you love that photograph? I don't know, for some reason that just speaks to me. There are no humans in it visible, but it's clearly there's a lot going on to support that many buildings and that much stuff. There's actually I think it's part of this building still exists down there. There's one that's still there. So that was the Bryant Paper Mill. That, of course, like I said, on the north side of Alcott. And then we've got the Kalamazoo Brewing Company, which ran up until Prohibition. So its roots kind of begin in the 1860s through a few different ownership changes. It went until 1915 when Local Option closed it up. Now I know you're saying, no, wait a minute, Prohibition was 1920, right? Local Option, Kalamazoo went dry in 1915. I just did a class for Western's Ollie program about all these old breweries. So interesting to dive into that. Talk about going down a rabbit hole. It's so interesting, and all of the forces that work against this and the shenanigans that went on, because every county went dry separately, right? So Calhoun County, Battle Creek was dry before Kalamazoo, so you just had to jump on the interurban car and come over here, drink your fill, and then go home, right? Well, then Kalamazoo went dry, but Grand Rapids was still wet. So there's about a year and a half there, and they bribed the streetcar, bribed the interurban driver to slow down so they could jump off before they got into town, so they didn't get busted. Sorry, I'm way off on a different topic, but I just find that fascinating. But anyway, that, of course, was up here. So we have this whole kind of circle of industry surrounding the where things built up. So it was really a working class neighborhood from the beginning. And it was very diverse, because each of those industries, we see Eastern Europeans, we see the Dutch, we see Germans, in each of those different industries doing different things and all kind of coming together here in this community. So, sorry, I hope I don't keep walking in front of you. Forgive me if I do. Just yell at me. Get out of my way. So this developed, this, of course, there's all this housing around. Well, just like today, they need places to shop, they need things to do. And we're still quite a ways out of the downtown area. Now, by the turn of the century, streetcar service was in. So the electric streetcars came out here in 1894. So we have streetcar service with downtown, but still we have a growing community. So a really kind of an active little retail corridor sprung up. This is a picture from what appears to be 1933. I'm a digital preservation specialist, which means I get to use this really cool equipment and preserve these old historic photographs, which if you take a really high resolution digital capture of this, you can read the license plate on the front of that car, and it's 1933. So what also gives it away too, again, is this sign up here, which is the Washington Square Gardens Dine and Dance. And clearly, according to the sign, you can drink beer. So this is this is 1933 when Kalamazoo then allowed beer again. So kind of an interesting picture. But anyway, it's a bit out of context because we're jumping ahead here. But nonetheless, it's kind of a vibrant, actually a very vibrant retail corridor set up. Here's another picture from a little later in the 1930s. Again, looking south along Portage Street. So you can see all the different stores that have sprung up and things since then. I equally like this. This was a series. There's actually 4. I only used 3 in this, but someone took a series of photographs out the window on the west side of the street looking east. So this is the east side of Portage Street, but kind of took a snapshot, 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 and the 4 snapshots. So you can kind of get an idea what the busy street looked like in this case, 1940. So.
Amazing.
It is, right? I know. This is one of my all-time favorites. This should have been in Life magazine. No, I'm serious. This is on Terrace Court, which is down there by Bank Street. But it's in 1945, and all the neighborhood kids have gotten together for a parade, as it were, probably 4th of July, who knows. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. But it just shows you the depth of the neighborhood and how things were developed by then even. It really began to grow like gangbusters. Which now with the kids, we need schools. So we'll mention a couple of them. There were actually a few schools. There were a couple of rural schools around here because, like I said, this was pretty much out in the sticks. So we have a couple of rural schools that had popped up. This one is the Lake Street School. So it was over on Lake Street, the corner of Russell and Lake, actually the northwest corner of Russell and Lake. Built in 1880, they added on to it several times, 4 or 5 or 6 times, and then finally demolished it in 1958 because it was considered a fire hazard. So, and then they built another school there, and et cetera. So, but that was one of the original. There's another view of it. This is from, I think, 1940. But you can see where it's been added on to on the back of it. So they added on and added on. And all of this is due to the growth of the neighborhood, right? I mean, as things fill up, houses are built, kids come along. The other one here that we need to talk about, though, is the Portage Street School. And this is where things get important because this was on the east side of Portage Street between Lay and Lane boulevards, right? It was erected in 1907, eventually demolished in the 60s, 1963. And then, of course, Washington School was built there on that spot. It looked like this if you were standing on Portage Street looking toward the east-northeast. That's what you would have seen if you were standing right at the corner looking straight on. This is the main entrance to the building. Now I make special mention of that school because this school, anybody know what I'm going to say next? Steve goes. This was the beginning of the library. So because our library system was then connected with the school district or was part of the school district, the main library, of course, was downtown. But when we started to talk about and discuss branch libraries, they were done in the schools. So they started developing libraries in the schools for the kids, of course, but then, residents, adults could go there too and check out books. So a lot of that became a reality because of this woman. This is Isabella Roberts. Isabella was our second Kalamazoo Public Library, essentially director. They went by different titles back then, but nonetheless, she was the second library director, and she was the longest running library director. 1875 to 1918, and she kept working even after that. She was pretty much responsible. Well, she was responsible for the art department, which more or less morphed into the local history department. So she had control of that until her health problems took over. But anyway, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek list that was in the newspaper of what these folks would want for Christmas, and she wanted another branch library. She was and this was from 1909, she was a really big advocate for these branch library systems, or branch libraries. And a lot of that is directly because of the Carnegies. Andrew Carnegie set up this gift for New York libraries and they essentially set up multiple neighborhood libraries, branch libraries. Now that doesn't have anything to do with this one other than the fact that it's the motivation for it. It's the idea behind it. It's where the idea of branch libraries came from. And Isabella was very moved by this thing. There were several points where she really felt we needed another branch library, because at that point in time, this area was becoming a significant suburb. It was a decent population down here. There was a lot going on. And not that it was so far away from downtown, but it was far enough that there was a barrier set up. And she was a very big advocate for, as we are today, for lowering those barriers to use. Why not create something, if people can't go to the library, bring the library to them. That was really the core of her belief. And she advocated strongly for a branch library. And she got a lot of pushback from it too, if you can believe it. People said, why? And New York was another example. Why do we need a branch library? We have a library. Do something else with the money. We need other stuff. Why do we need a branch library? Well, again, short of a streetcar ride into town, that was more than a lot of people could afford. It was beyond the means of what many people could, especially ones that would use and frequent the library. Yes, it was only a nickel, but a nickel was a lot of money then, and it of course took time and everything else. So her idea was bring the library to the people. So they did. They ended up opening a room in that Portage Street School in February 1910. And so they opened this up. They had 500 books, but they could supply the children. They could, it was open to the public, and it was hugely successful. It grew like gangbusters. It grew very, very quickly. In fact, between the school growing so much and the library use and library growing so much, they more or less mutually outgrew each other. And by 1919, the school needed the extra room for their growth, and the library needed more room beyond that. So it was kind of a mutual thing. So the library moved. It moved to a storefront over on Portage Street, or a little farther up on Portage Street, I should say, near Washington Street. It would be right around the corner from where this picture shows you. In fact, there's the map. So we've got Washington Street up at the top. North is up at the top. So it was in a storefront there. So just a regular retail store. The library took over and they expanded into there. Well, usage kept going. Every year they published this library statistics in the newspaper, and every year it gets more and more and more and more, which is interesting as it goes along. So now comes Flora Roberts, no relation to Isabella. But Flora was our third library director. She was library director here from 1918 until the mid-40s, 1942. So Flora was another advocate for branch libraries. She was really an advocate for taking the library services to the people. She was really kind of a mover and shaker in the community, and really pushed to have library services available. So she's the one that strong-armed, for lack of a better phrase, the school board into buying the property where we're sitting right now. Into buying this piece of property. It was an odd-shaped lot. There were houses on either side. For whatever reason, the lot had never sold. It had never built anything here. So she got the funds together and got the school board to purchase the lot and go ahead and build the building. So Portage was the main branch, and this was this is not only the largest, this is Kalamazoo's first suburban neighborhood, as it were. It was really the first one. It was the largest, and this was the first ever branch library here in the community. Eastwood opened up just a couple of weeks later, so they did kind of those two at the same time. But Portage was the first one. So they built the building, and it opened in early 1927, or in the summer 1927, I should say. This is what it looked like at about the time that it opened. In fact, there's evidence in this picture of kind of the construction things going on. So it's probably about the time they opened. They made a big deal out of it. It was an English Tudor style, and that it would be a beautiful thing, and it would suit the community, which, it is. So, but that's what it looked like right about the time that it opened. Thankfully, not a whole lot different than what it looks like today, which is a gift, right? Here we are 96 years later, and we still have an absolutely gorgeous building. That says a lot. This is another photograph I absolutely love. I found this one in the library archives. This is a seldom, actually, we don't see early views of this angle very often, but this is taken from the south side looking toward the northwest. It just looks like such a cute little building, but you can't really see the rest of the building behind it. But in the Sanborn map there, you can see how it kind of fits in that area, and you can also notice that there are houses on either side of it. So it was really in a residential neighborhood, which this photo clearly shows. You can see the house next door, and I don't know, I just think that's a really cool picture. So that was taken about the time it opened. They haven't really gotten to the outside of it yet. Interestingly, it was designed, the architects designed it was an odd-shaped lot, so sort of a trapezoidal-shaped lot. But they designed it so that it fit within the lot without having to make weird angles within the building. So I think that's absolutely genius. This is the upper floor. You can see the property lines on the top and the bottom. The street is on the left, of course. We have the walkway. This is the juvenile reading room. We would know it as a children's room. And then the adult reading room over here, and offices in the vestibule of the library or the lobby and such. This one I think is interesting. This is the lower level.
Hold on, Keith. I want to point out something.
Sure.
All right, yeah, go back to
There you go.
my office. On that one says restroom.
Oh. Now we know. That's
Go to the first floor now.
that's funny. Oh, sorry. There you go.
It says restroom.
Yep.
That's my
That's Steve's office. That's where Steve rests. He works hard. He does. He's one of the hardest working people I know. So, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, in the workroom. Interestingly, whether you realize it or not, if you go into the bowels of the library, there is a little tiny staircase back in there. It's tiny. I mean, it's yeah, it's pretty crazy. So anyway, down on the bottom floor where you guys are sitting, we are now in the community room, of course. This I think is interesting though. There's a storage room back under the other side that was apparently early on earmarked as a museum. Never used for that, never developed, never finished off. It's always been a storage room. But there's the coal room here. Steve pointed out you can still see one of the cleanouts of the chimney underneath back in the back corner. And of course the boiler room and kind of the lobby here between the two. So, and it's, again, I mean, it's been preserved in its pretty much its original state. So says a lot. This was in the Michigan Library Association bulletin when it was first built. Actually, there's another one. I should have included it in this, but I didn't want to run out of time. It was actually featured in a journal about library fixtures. It had a 4-page spread when it first came out about fixturing in the inside of the library, and this was a nationwide publication. So this is the upstairs above us here, I believe, right? Yeah. What would be the children's room now, or juvenile room. Yeah. Interesting, again, the ratio of product to seating and things. So there's tons of tables, plenty of places to sit, but in terms of product, we had room for about 15,000 books at this stage in the game. If you remember, it started with just a handful, just a few hundred. So, but of course, it's grown significantly since then. You'll probably recognize this. That's the front desk. This was a series that was photographed about the time the library opened. So, and then this is, of course, the front room. Again, once again, filled with seating, tables and chairs, and plenty of places to sit and do things. A desk over on the far right-hand side. I'm going to guess maybe a reference desk, but nonetheless, just a stunningly beautiful building. Of course, this is the outside. Really doesn't look a whole lot different than it does today, which I think is a tribute and pretty incredible. So during the 40s, these are a children's program, obviously set up around topics of the war going on. I pointed out to Steve earlier, these kids don't look all that happy to have their picture in the newspaper, but they just really look troubled. I don't know. They just really don't look all that happy. So I don't know. Who knows? Maybe Dad's fighting overseas. Give him a break. But anyway. This was in this very room, of course. This was a children's program from 1958. And sorry to say, these kids don't look like they're having very much fun either. So, but kids are kids, right? And I'm sure they were enjoying it. I'm sure they were having fun at story time. So, should I mention? Well, it's interesting as we look at the world now and we talk about diversity and inclusion and we talk about racism and we talk about all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, it was still very much a white neighborhood, which is to be expected at that stage in the game. But this little guy in the middle of the front room with a butch cut, I don't know if you can see, but he's got a Union Jack on his t-shirt. Now, I'm pretty confident that Leonard Skinner didn't exist in that day and age, so it's probably not that, but I think that's really interesting. And I hadn't even noticed that. I've seen this picture 1,000 times, and Steve called that one out. So, how things change over time, right? So in 1977, they celebrated the 50th anniversary of this building. Of course, the library is older than that, or the Portage Library is older than that. But nonetheless, they celebrated. I thought this was incredibly interesting, that they had the room, they could clear out the room and hold an adult program. This is an author visit. This is a Kalamazoo Gazette photo. I cannot remember the author's name, I'm sorry. But nonetheless, I think that's interesting that they could just clear out the whole library room and have an author visit, right in the middle of the lobby. It would otherwise be full of tables and chairs and things. So.
And the interesting thing to me about this one is the fluorescent lights.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw those earlier pictures that almost looked like a whole chandelier with candles.
Right. And this.
And then if you go up there and look what we have now, it's much better. It's
Right.
closer than
Yep.
it was at the beginning.
And this is from 1980, so this is we're beyond the 50-year mark. This is into the 80s. Of course, vinyl was king back then, so you could come to the library. True story. I grew up in small town in Ionia, and my first visit to the library was in 7th grade. I lived out in the country, so my parents and my aunts and uncles all had massive libraries, so I got to do all of that, but I never had been to the public library. And so for our literature class, she took us down the hill, down to the library. And I thought the books were really cool, but you could take out records. And so it tells you something about my personality, I guess. But I took home an Amboy Dukes album and a Doors record. So I started strong. So. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that was the media of the day. So this is from probably about the same time, 1980s. And a children's program from about the same time, too. This didn't have an exact date on the back of it. But now, as opposed to the others, these look like they're having fun. So. And interestingly, you can see now the mix of the neighborhood is changing. The demographic is changing. So we get up to the 1990s, and the library makes a pitch for not a mortgage, but a bond, right, to revamp the library. So massive renovation of the downtown, added a story on and all of that. Complete new building in Ashtamall, complete new building in Eastwood. This one, thankfully, and then Powell got a significant renovation too at the same time. This one, interestingly, rather than sadly destroying it, which thankfully they didn't do, they chose to preserve and restore this branch. So not that it was in bad shape, but it did need some repair. It needed some refreshing, but they kept it to its original form and basically restored it to the way it was. So paint colors, all the woodwork, all of that got a complete redo. Really the only thing they did, because the other ones got, they had this prismic pattern stuff that puts the rainbows in the front of the main library and that kind of stuff. They wanted to pull that idea into this without ruining the thing. So if you go upstairs, you'll notice these little lighting sconces now have these sort of triangular space-shaped looking prismic things on them. But that's really the only kind of updating they did. Everything else was for the sake of preserving the way it was, which I think is incredibly honorable. Outside, we had a big problem by then with water in the basement. And so they regraded the outside. They bought actually property on both sides, regraded it, built a parking lot. We're in the 1990s here. Built the parking lot and regraded with the attempt to mitigate the water problem. It didn't work. We still had problems up until just recently. So I don't know, when did they finally get this done, Steve?
It was just before the pandemic started.
Yeah.
You can see kind of around the outside the different color floor. So they actually dug a trench all through there that carries the water and pumps it out, because it was actually water coming, the groundwater coming up.
Right. Right. Because we're sitting in a celery field.
Yeah.
So. Basically, I mean, yeah. But anyway, so revamp the outside. So there, serving Washington Square and Edison community for 96 years now in this building. So 4 more years and we'll hit the century mark. So these are some pictures that John Lacko took in 2010. So just kind of showing the building. Did you guys notice this up on the, yeah, he's still up there. He's still sitting there.
Take it down right now.
Oh, is it down now?
John Meyer has it, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Well, that means he's refurbishing it.
Yeah.
John will follow through. John never lets us down, so. But anyway, that's, I guess, the history of the library in a nutshell here. So if you're interested in more about this library and the other branch libraries, there are articles, written histories. Go to the library websites, kpl.gov, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of articles on there, including ones about this branch and about all the other libraries and such, and about the history of the library. Of course, now I would be remiss not to say that we're celebrating the library system's 150th anniversary this year. 1872 is when we actually became, they turned a school library at the insistence of our first librarian, turned a school library into a public library in October 1872. So we're taking this whole year and we're celebrating the 150th. So, but if you go to kpl.gov, there's a link right there on the homepage, or you can go to 150.kpl.gov. And there are several things there. One thing, we got the rights to digitize and release 3 or 4 really well done local history books. The one that Pam O'Connor and Lynn Houghton did is in there. There's 19th Century Village is in there. There's that little, if you've got the street guide, the little pocket street guide that when you open it, it falls apart. That's in there. And then there's one other one that escapes me. But anyway, there's links to those in there. There's also a timeline, which I can brag about because I helped put it together, but nonetheless, it's really fascinating. It takes you basically step by step from the first day of the When the library was established, we're talking a decade, more than a decade before it became a public library even. So it takes us from there through significant milestones right up till the current day. So look for the timeline in there. It's just a lot of fun. Thanks, of course, Edison Neighborhood Association. They're here and active. WMU Archives is a great place to find stuff. Lynn Houghton's a great friend and a great source of information there. So they're up there. Just go to wmich.edu/libraries and you can get in there. And the museum, of course, and of course the Hispanic American Council is very active in this area. So, all right, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you.